what's up? Hello, my name is Emma, and today I'm going to be talking about some books that I've recently read. Many of you guys may have noticed that I have not been doing my monthly reading wrap-ups as frequently as I used to. My school schedule honestly has just made it difficult for me to commit to making a specific video every single month. So for now, I decided that I'm going to be doing my reading wrap-ups as books I've recently read or something of that sort. So it's the same exact video as my monthly reading wrap-ups, just not monthly. So the books I'm going to be talking about today basically cover what I read from October to the end of 2019. First up, I have The Lost Hero by Rick Riordan. Now, I consider myself to be a pretty big fan of Rick Riordan. I don't think I've ever read a book from him that I didn't like. I've just avoided the Heroes of Olympus series for no reason for so many years, and I decided it was finally time for me to give it a chance, and what do you know, I absolutely loved it. I ended up giving The Lost Hero 5 out of 5 stars. I listened to the audiobook version through my local library, and it was a really enjoyable experience. I find the cast of characters to be very dynamic. Individually, they have a lot of complex layers, and that's something that I know Rick Riordan does for all of his characters. They just feel so authentic and grounded in reality. I believe the Heroes of Olympus series is technically middle grade, but compared to definitely Percy Jackson, I feel like this first installment does feel more mature and could be targeted more towards older readers. I truly treasured being right back in Rick Riordan's world of Greek gods. I was actually surprised with how entangled the story of Percy Jackson and the Olympians and the Heroes of Olympus series was. And I actually think it really benefited me to start Heroes of Olympus so long after I finished Percy Jackson. I feel like people compare these two very strongly, and like Heroes of Olympus just doesn't live up to Percy Jackson for them. But because it's been so long, I feel like I was really able to appreciate it as its own individual series. So I'm super happy I started this series. It is just full of so much great mythology and adventure, and I can't wait to continue on with the next installment. Next up, I actually buddy read some graphic novels with one of my very first booktube friends, Red from Little Red Reader, and together we read Heartstopper Volumes 1 and 2 by Alice Oseman. If you haven't heard of Heartstopper, it is a YA graphic novel series about two boys who go to an all-boys school and they become friends, but they develop feelings for one another. I was a little skeptical going into Heartstopper because if you watch my channel, you know that I don't read a ton of graphic novels, but I was so pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed both of these books. I ended up giving Volume 1 4.5 stars and Volume 5 5 stars because I just enjoyed this one a little bit more. I think it was because I was already invested in these characters and this story that I was able to appreciate it as a whole more, but they were both still really fantastic. I just adore the art style of this book. It is so cute, and the facial expressions seriously are so amazing, and they really propel the story. These graphic novels are so quick and easy to read. It is like the perfect thing if you are trying to get out of a reading slump, if you're looking for something to make you happy and just be like a lighthearted enjoyment read. Sorry, I'm on like a spinny chair and I'm having a great time while filming. I definitely acknowledge that I have this bias with graphic novels where going into it, no matter what the story is, I just feel like I'm not going to get enough because it is so limited in what can be explored through text. But Heartstopper was way more fulfilling than I ever expected, and it's definitely opened me up to want to read more graphic novels because I realized how much I can actually enjoy them. The next book I read in 2019 was Supernova by Marissa Meyer, and this is the conclusion to the Renegades series, which is one of my all-time favorites. If you are a fan of Renegades and interested to hear more of my thoughts, I did film a full reading vlog of my entire experience reading Supernova and going to the Supernova signing with Marissa Meyer, so I'll link that below if you want to check it out. I did not love Supernova as much as I really wanted to, and I'm very disappointed by that because it was truly one of my most anticipated of the year, and I thought it could be my absolute favorite of the year. Renegades is a series I love that I'm super invested in, so naturally I went into Supernova Atiya with a lot of expectations. I had like some really clear-cut ideas for what I wanted to happen in the story, so naturally when things didn't go in that direction, I felt a little disappointed. There were some great twists and so many scenes that I absolutely adored, but the overall plot was just like smaller than I really wanted. I was expecting more from it. Also, I thought the characters were a little bit watered down compared to the previous installments where I thought they were super complex and layered, and there were also some characters where I was like severely dissatisfied with the direction of their character arc. As for like construction wise, I thought the story was decent. I thought it took some risks that I enjoyed, and I feel like I'm overall satisfied with how this story has wrapped up, but I just like was expecting so much more from it that left me feeling a little let down. So yeah, I really thought this book was gonna be like a 6 out of 5 star rating, but I've settled on 3.5 stars, which I think is very fair. On a happier note, the next book is one of my favorite books that I ended up reading in 2019, and that is Ninth House by Libri. Ninth House is an adult paranormal fantasy story that follows a girl who has the ability to see ghosts, and she's recruited by one of the ancient secret societies on the Yale University campus in order to work for them, and along the way a girl is murdered. Ninth House has honestly been a pretty polarizing book because some people have really disliked it, but I personally found it beautiful and breathtaking. It's just so atmospheric and magical and spooky. I just love a book that really makes you feel something. I elected to listen to the audiobook version of Ninth House, which I honestly don't know if it was the best decision for me because I found myself rewinding like a million times. Oh my god, I probably restarted this book from the beginning at least like 6 times, and one of those times I got like halfway through and I was like, I have to go all the way back to the beginning. And then every time I would just get like a couple of chapters in and I would have to get a couple of chapters back. I feel like I read this whole book twice. But honestly, it really worked for me and I did not mind it because I loved being immersed in the story so much that I literally did not want to finish it. But all of the re-listening really helped me synthesize the story and understand it in a way that I think other people didn't, and that contributed to why they didn't like it. In addition to having like a super dark magic system, this book also deals with some serious topics like sexual assault, PTSD, murder. It's hard to read and not for the faint of heart, but I personally love books like this, and I thought that all of these topics were really expressed with care and intention. I also loved the mysteries in Ninth House. I loved trying to uncover like the murder of this girl and how it relates to Yale, but also what happened to Alex's mentor and where did he go. I just think that Libri is such an immensely talented author. I've read like almost all of her books, and I'm just realizing now, I think Ninth House might be my favorite. It was an absolute favorite book of last year. It is a book I foresee myself rereading many times in the future, which I feel is really the marker of something special, and I'm just so happy I read it. The next book I read in 2019 was The Beautiful by Renee Atiya. This was another one of my most anticipated of the year. This is a young adult historical fantasy set in 1870s New Orleans, and it's about a girl who has fled a bad past in Paris to start anew, but some murders happen as soon as she arrives. I had a bit of an interesting experience with The Beautiful. The second I started this book, I was in love. I was enchanted, I was smitten, I was obsessed with each of the characters. The writing was just so decadent and gorgeous, and I just like could not get enough of this book. I think it was really school that made it difficult for me, but I essentially got into a little bit of a reading slump, so I was just struggling to find time and motivation to pick up my book, even though I really loved the story. So I ended up reading something else in the middle, which totally like reset my motivation to read. But by the time I ended up getting back to The Beautiful, like I just wasn't as invested or impressed with the story anymore. Despite feeling a little iffy around the end, I still overwhelmingly liked it, so I gave it a 4-star rating. This is the kind of comparison that's either gonna really intrigue people or really turn you off, but it reminded me of Twilight. The main couple just reminds me so much of all of these classic classic YA romances that made me fall in love with the genre in the first place, but I mean that in like the best way because it still felt fresh, new, and modern. The only other letdown of this book is that it was really pitched like by everyone as being like the YA book that's gonna bring back the vampire trend and it's gonna make everyone want more vampire books. And while like this is definitely a series about vampires, the vampires don't actually like play a role in the narrative until like the last chapter. I was just kind of expecting the vampires to be more at the forefront of the story as opposed to like being this looming unknown presence, and then at the end it's like, oh wait, they're vampires. I anticipate that being explored more in book 2, which I am really excited for. So I'm a little conflicted on the beautiful. It's not the experience I expected, but overall it was still really good and I really enjoyed it. The next audiobook I listened to was The Turn of the Key by Ruth Ware. I picked this up on Overdrive because at the time my sister had read this book and she really liked it, and I had a couple of other booktube friends who were talking about it and enjoying it as well. And as someone who loves a good adult thriller, I thought I would give it a chance. Now, I've read like 1 or 2 Ruth Ware books in the past, and I feel like she is just like a consistent 3-star author for me. Like, I'll read her books, I'll have an okay time with them, but they just don't blow me away. This book follows a nanny who starts a new live-in position at a smart house that is like controlled by technology. And the catch of the story is essentially it is written from the main character's perspective as a letter to her lawyer trying to plead her innocence. Now, the whole letter thing sounded really unique. In theory, it just didn't add anything to the story. Like, this felt like a totally normal, conventional novel until the points when the main character would randomly throw in, and I'm writing this to you, Mr. Wrexham, because blah, blah, blah. And I think the most interesting concept of the story was that it was set in a smart house. And so I sort of went into it with the expectation of like the Disney Channel original movie Smart House. I just kind of expected the technology to be a little bit more futuristic and play like a bigger role in this story than it actually did. And it's still kind of interesting because it's got this duality with it also being like this old Gothic mansion. But I was kind of just like, okay, like this is just a little bit above the normal smart technology I can find in a lot of people's houses. The mystery was also not that interesting to me. The plot and pace of the story is extremely slow, and I felt like a lot of the time we were just sort of cycling through similar events. It was just like super mundane days, and then like nighttime is scary. It was suspenseful, it like got my heart rate up, but it didn't really pay off in the end. And then the ending of this book was so disappointing for me. I cannot stand it when a thriller just like tells me the ending of the mystery and then the story is over. And I do understand why with stories like The Turn of the Key, that type of ending does suit the story and it plays a role, but I just personally prefer to watch the mystery unfold and gather the information as we go, and then also see the characters' responses to it. Overall, this book was just really underwhelming for me. I don't really get the hype for it. It was okay. I don't feel like it was a waste of time, but I can think of so many thrillers I've enjoyed much more. Next up, I've got another favorite of 2019 that I've been talking about a lot recently, and that's because it legitimately is a favorite. My Dark Vanessa by Cait Elizabeth Russell. This is a story of a girl who gets into an elite boarding school, and while she is struggling to adjust to her new life there, she begins a romantic and sexual relationship with one of her English professors. 17 years later, after Vanessa's entire life has really been shaped by her relationship with her teacher, more allegations have come out about students who are accusing him of abusing them as well, and so Vanessa really has to confront her past trauma. I adored this book. It was poignant and beautiful and heart-wrenching. It is a book that is entirely difficult to read, but so necessary in today's world. I feel it handles the topics of sexual abuse and trauma in a very raw but sensitive manner. But beyond that, the story is also about power dynamics and the institutional obstacles that are placed in front of survivors that make it difficult to confront these issues. issues. I think it is a remarkably powerful and important novel, and I'm really grateful that I read it. I know that there's also been some controversy around this book. I haven't been following it too closely because I just haven't been involved in the book Twitter world lately. From what I know, there is a different author who's accusing this author of plagiarizing their novel. But throughout this whole process, the author has said that Dark Vanessa is inspired by her past relationships that she has had with older men, and it is like not necessarily semi-autobiographical, but it came from a place of her personal history. I think that's all I have to say on that. I loved this book. I highly recommend it if it's something that you think you can handle, and I'm really excited for it to come out and for you all to experience it this March. The next audiobook I listened to in 2019 was The Diviners by Libri, and I am reading this as a part of the Diviners Club read-along for this series. If you are a fan of The Diviners, I will link the live shows that we have already had as a part of this read-along if you want to hear some of my more in-depth thoughts along with Sarah and Monica, who are my co-hosts. And I'll also link some other fun Diviners-themed videos for you. I know y'all have heard me talk about the Diviners series. It is set in 1920s New York City, and it follows a group of teens and just general people who all have different supernatural abilities. I am not a big historical fiction reader whatsoever. Historical fiction is typically like one thing that I will always intentionally shy away from. But The Diviners is so authentically grounded in its history that it totally transports you back to the time, and it really captures all of like the glitz and glamour of the roaring 20s, but it also deals with some of the darker elements of that time, along with xenophobia, eugenics, anti-immigration efforts, and racism. Libri is a master author, in my opinion. Everything from her beautiful prose to the characterization and the setting and the plotting of the mystery. She is literally just so talented at what she does. This has been my second time reading the Diviner series, and I'm thoroughly enjoying it. I'm just so invested in this diverse cast and the many complex mysteries that come along with this series. It is full of really big books that I feel sometimes turn people off because it seems so dense, but I feel like there's just so much great content in here. If you have not started the Diviner series yet, it is one of my absolute favorites, and I'd highly recommend you guys pick it up. To finish up with my last two reads of 2019, I picked up some Christmassy books based on the season, and the first one is the book I read every year around Christmas time, The Afterlife of Holly Chase by Cynthia Hand. This year was my fourth read of The Afterlife of Holly Chase, and it was just as good as the last three. If you have not heard me talk about The Afterlife of Holly Chase, it is a YA Christmas Carol retelling, and it follows a girl named Holly Chase who is stuck working at this organization that basically recreates the story of A Christmas Carol every year in an effort to change the ways of someone who is a Scrooge. Now, this time listening to the audiobook, I did notice more flaws in the writing than I have in my previous reads. I know a lot of people that love this book, like myself, but I also have a ton of friends who thought it was just okay, and that was because of the writing. So during this reread, I definitely saw a little bit more of what they were talking about. It's just not the most mature, sophisticated, or fleshed out, but I've never been one to judge a book solely on its writing style. I really appreciate other elements so much more. So this book is still like fantastic to me despite that. I love Ethan and Holly's relationship so much. They are a true OTP for me. The Afterlife of Holly Chase is just such a fun ride. It follows an unlikable narrator and has some great character development with a swoony romance. It's the best. I love it. It's an absolute favorite of mine. If you have not picked it up yet, I really think you should. And the final book I read in 2019 is another Christmassy retelling, and that is Winterspell by Claire Legrand. Winterspell is a dark historical retelling of the Nutcracker, and it follows a girl named Clara who has to travel to a magical world in order to retrieve her father, who has been kidnapped, and her best companion is a statue from her childhood that has come to life and is apparently a prince. I went into it thinking that like I might not like it whatsoever, and I like had the potential to DNF it within the first few chapters, and then I like really liked it, and then by the end I was like, oh, okay, it was just okay. I thought that it was a unique take on a classic story that I really love. Like, The Nutcracker is a super significant Christmas time story for me. And I also thought that the setting of this book with the combination of magic and clockwork did make it very intriguing. I couldn't really connect with any of the characters. They were either just like unlikable and uninteresting. Their motivations kept flip-flopping where I couldn't tell if I was supposed to like them or not, or both. Okay, also, I would love insight from anyone else who has read this book, but like, I couldn't tell if it was supposed to be queer or not. Clara's like sexual awakening, I guess, is a pretty big theme in this book for some reason, and it's something that I just like didn't pay attention to much because I didn't care about it, but it seemed like there were some like real intimate moments between girls in this book, but it was never like overtly addressed. It felt like there was supposed to be some queer representation, but it was disguised, and like that means that there's no queer representation at all. And while like I was pretty engaged for the story for like the first half of it, and I thought it had a lot of potential, I just slowly lost interest and like did not care about it whatsoever. Also, Christmas had passed and I like still had to finish the book, so like the reason I picked up the book wasn't really relevant anymore, but honestly like the book just wasn't strong enough to keep me going without that. I feel like the book had a lot of potential and it could have gone in some great directions, but it just was not as deep as I wanted it to be. It really reminded me a lot of like some of those earlier YA stories that I do still love, but it was before YA had a lot of substance in some situations, and I just feel like Winterspell kind of fits into that. So that concludes all of the books that I have recently read, which is basically like the end of 2019 reading wrap up. And also, what are some other books that you have recently read? I would love to know. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you soon for a new one. Bye!